Hey guys, good morning. Hello. Some of you sound so bright for a Sunday morning. So, as some of you may know already, my name is Nolan. I am here today on this weekend at Dancefair to give you some insights into some of the techniques behind some of the more popular styles of electronic dance music at the moment. Now, give you a bit of background about myself. First of all, I develop artists. I have a company back in Liverpool in the UK, and I have worked with and helped develop talent including the likes of Daniel Avery, Ryan Davis, Bontan, and a number of other artists who are on their way up towards getting the career that they want in the music industry. So I take artists in, I develop their production style, I get them to find their unique voice, point them towards labels that they'd like to be signed to, and essentially help them transition into a career in the music industry from what they're currently doing. So I've got a lot of experience in understanding different styles and types of dance music, how they're made, what the tools are and the techniques are behind it. Some of you may have seen my workshop yesterday on breaking down the Maceo Plex remix of Gus Gus Crossfade. Now, in terms of the style of music we're going to look at today, very, very different. Much more percussive, much more about groove, very different techniques applied. So we're going to look at this in the style of Drumcode records, obviously as the title of the workshop is today. Now, to kind of move this forward and be very, very relevant and very kind of current about it, we're going to look at the latest release on Drumcode, which is by a producer from Glasgow called Harvey McKay. And the track from the EP, if I just get rid of this here, and just cut that out. I'm just going to change my display here because these things always zoom in. Let me do that. And if I just get this going as well, so I can just capture that. Okay. So it's in the style of, again, this sort of Drumcode techno type of style. And the track in question is called The Cure. So if I was to sort of just go over into my arrangement view here in Ableton, you'll be able to see that I've got the reference track open. Now, this is something that I do very regularly with my clients when I work with them in a one-to-one setting. We actually look at where their production styles and level is compared to the reference tracks that they give me, and we start to look at the techniques and the gap they have between the skills that they currently have, the skills they're going to need to be able to emulate or get into the right ballpark of the style that they would like to be able to produce in. And then we start to move very quickly towards that goal. But we do it in a slightly different way because, don't get me wrong, as I said yesterday during my Maceo Plex workshop, it's not about learning how to copy Maceo Plex because that's just fake. And also, as well, to be honest, we're not Maceo Plex. We're never going to be able to get his sound because we're not him. Because as I've talked about yesterday as well, during my mindset lectures as well, with Henry Sarmiento, we talked about how the major thing that you can work on more than anything is the person driving the actual software. Anyone can learn how to make music, especially these days with the technology the way it is, because it is so easy now to be able to get an affordable laptop and get some software going and to make the music that you're into. However, it's about being able to learn what tools are required within a particular genre or a particular style of music and be able to emulate that in our own unique fashion. So when I was learning music production a long time ago, too long ago as far as I'm concerned, because I'm starting to feel old now, and we made a big point when I was learning about looking at artists that we loved and were influenced by, and be able to tear these tracks apart. And for me, back in sort of 2005, 2006, when I started to really learn this stuff, I'm an SAE graduate. I, did an audio engineering course, built myself up to being a head instructor at an SAE campus. And we looked at, or I personally looked at Trent Moller quite a lot, because at that time, those tracks like Ricketed and the other types of remixes that he'd done, his remix of Moby Go was huge at that time. And I literally sat there for hours on end with these tracks on loop, training my ears to be able to hear the slightest difference in tracks and be able to pinpoint the techniques used, the samples used, the types of compressors used, and be able to really emulate that style. But I kind of got to about 80–75% of like the sound-alike level, if you will, and then moved in my own direction. So for me, it was always about learning what tools that emulating this style of production was going to give me, so I could then use them in my own unique way. It's very similar to, you could say a carpenter doesn't have 16 different hammers. He has the hammer for the job. So it's about learning what tools you have at your disposal and then being able to build something unique yourself. So again, I don't want this to be a whole kind of let's copy the style of Drumcode type thing. I want us to look at it from a technique standpoint and see what we can learn. Because truly, when we start to critically listen to these types of tracks, you get an idea that actually the answers are staring us right in the face if we're clever about it. So what I'm going to do first of all, I'm going to start by playing some of the reference track, and then we'll be able to kind of get into what kind of techniques Harvey might have used in order to get something as a close approximation. But again, we can see the techniques, and again, you can start to bolt those onto your own workflow. So let's take a listen. Vocal come back in, nicely chopped up. Get a good impression from listening there. Now, the interesting thing about a lot of this modern techno, as we kind of come to call it, which seems a bit strange to me because a lot of the what we term to be techno now from record labels like Drumcode, to me, I mean, maybe it's just me being old, I don't know, but it seems like tough house music from maybe about 10 years ago. And I don't mean that in a bad way because I love that stuff. But it's more to do with the style of it and the fact that it's quite rhythmical, quite loop-based. And I don't mean in terms of it using drum loops, because every sound that I've gotten here that I'm going to use to show off the techniques is an original kind of single hit sound. So ultimately, it's kind of, this type of techno is used more like a tool. Where, I mean, if you look at DJs like, say, for example, Slam, or, other types of DJs where they'll use these as almost like layers, where, you see, again, I engineered a gig for Slam last year, and they were essentially using various different parts and loops of these types of tracks almost like 8 times over to get a tougher kind of overall arrangement. So one thing that I've noticed in recent years is that techno's gotten more stripped back, more percussive, and slightly houseier. But what that affords is more flexibility in the DJ booth. So it can be very easy to overfill and overcomplicate these styles, because really where the toughness comes from is the processing. And again, as I said in previous workshops, and I'll reiterate it again today for people who weren't here yesterday, the sound design aspect is really important, but it's only about 50% of what you actually do. The sound itself that you pick is about 50% of the battle. The rest of it is to do with the processing. in terms of how you compress it, how you EQ it, etc. Now, what I've got here is essentially a near version of this track. And again, I'm doing this in a very, very highly kind of, specific way in order to show you what kind of techniques are involved. But we'll start to strip it down, and obviously the drums are going to play a massive part in this, as well as the bass, and obviously as well the vocals. So I don't have the exact same vocal, and nor would I want to, because I want to try and do something maybe slightly different. But we'll go through vocals, we'll go through the kick particularly. The kick is really, really important in this type of sort of production. And also as well things like the drums, how the drums have come together, the various different patterns, etc., as well as the bass and the lead. So you're going to see a lot of interesting kind of plug-in processing here as well, including things like parallel compression, and again, some things that I'm doing on the mix bus to try and get that real sort of fatness in the track. So, first of all, if we listen to the actual kick from the beginning of the reference track, if I play that right from the beginning, now you can hear there's obviously extra elements to it. There's maybe a little hi-hat in there, or maybe there's a little extra kind of flavour or tone to a kick. Now, obviously we could, again, go through endless lists of kick drums, but I'll be honest with you, with the tools that we've got available to us these days, I feel like those days have kind of been and gone a little bit, especially with some of the more specific tools, like, for example, the Nicky Romero kick plugin. Because for me, it's an interesting one, because I'm seeing producers of all different types of styles essentially using this tool to be able to create their own kick drums from scratch. It completely changes the thought process. I can probably speak for a lot of people in this room when I say that in the past, you may have sat there and gone through literally hundreds or maybe even thousands of kick drums in a session. And my God, is that the most boring thing to do on the face of the earth. Seriously, I'd rather jump out of the window than do that these days. Seriously. Don't hold me to it, but Yeah, it just sucks all of my creativity, and it just sucks away all of my inspiration. But what I've found now, moving towards, in the last sort of 3-4 years, working with plugins similar to these, like Bassism, which was obviously the first big one in terms of being able to generate kicks. Then obviously the Nicky Romero kick synthesizer's done an amazing job in the last year. Previous to that as well, another one I love is obviously another great Dutch pioneer in Rob Pappen with Punch. And I still bring Punch out for certain styles of music when I really want that kind of warm, bassy, quite analogy type sound. But here it's kind of an interesting hybrid. Now what you'll see here is that I've got essentially a slightly modified preset, because I'm a big fan of finding something close and then changing it. That's my first port of call in production. If then that doesn't work, I will then wipe the slate completely clean, have a blank page, so to speak, and then try and build something completely from scratch. So what I've done here is modified this kick. But what you'll notice first of all, and again the most important thing, is that I've got the key tracking on. Now, analysing the track, it means that we've got a track in a certain key. Now, what you'll see here is that from the pattern that I actually have in here, as I dial down, you'll actually see, if I fold, the kick is actually in A. So the whole track is essentially in A. The way it looks is it actually looks like it's in A minor, because it's a very, very simple track. However, in terms of the tuning of kick and bass, absolutely essential to get this right. So again, the kick plugin makes it really super simple in order to get that kick exactly where you want it. The rest of it then comes down into shaping things like the pitch, shaping the length, shaping the click, and particularly in this case, because it's a very raw kick in this track, there seems to be a little bit of top-end kind of distortion almost on top of it, so that kind of got me thinking in terms of what we could do. And the first kind of option is always to use the onboard distortion within the plugin. So I've used that in order to create a slightly different tone. So what I'll probably do for now is I'll isolate that, we'll play the kick on its own, and you'll see exactly what I mean. And I'm going to maybe do some extra processing on here, because what I've done is I've kind of left things a little bit loose, so I can actually add some more processing so you can see some actions happening in real time. So let's say, for example, we just play this for now, and if I just play it without the distortion, and without any form of processing on it, you'll get a bit of a feeling for where we're going. So I'm going to take everything off the mix bus here as well. And we're going to have a little listen. So. Quite a standard kick, right? Probably heard that a million times before in various tracks. In terms of how the shaping of the kick changes as a result of the processing, you can probably see if I just dial in the kick here on the distortion. Now you can hear a couple of things happening. You've got the actual distortion happening with the click included, meaning the click is pre the distortion, which means the whole kick is being shaped. The tone I've got quite high. Effectively, this filters the distortion in order to place it at certain areas of the kick. So the distortion will only trigger further up towards the more percussive parts, which is going to start giving us that kind of more ground, sort of gritty top end to the kick that we're kind of desiring here. And obviously the click plays its part as well. In terms of the solo in this for now, you can hear it's got quite a weighty kind of, substance to it, maybe more so than other clicks. If you turn that up loud enough, it'd probably pass through another kick on another track. So applying that with the sub as well and with the distortion, and as I add more processing, you'll be able to appreciate what harmonics are being added as a result. So if I... And then the final one, which will make a big difference. So you can probably feel there's quite a significant difference there. So in terms of the processing moving forward, what I have here, and again, for those of you who attended yesterday, this might not come as a shock, because I'm absolutely incapable of producing a record without this, essentially. I use it mixing, I use it for mastering, I use it in production to shape sounds, and effectively what it does is emulate what we call the non-linear responses of an analog mixing desk. Now, what that means is placing this plugin on every channel on the actual session in Ableton, or in any DAW for that matter, because this is something that will work no matter the DAW you work in. You have 5 different console types. I like the Brit N, which actually is a Neve VR Legend console, which is a highly sought after analog console, which I've been quite privileged to actually use a hardware version of in the past. And let me tell you, having run lots of mixes, both electronic and otherwise, through a Neve VR Legend console, and using this plugin, I'll be honest with you, I can't tell the difference. I really cannot tell the difference. It's a spectacular emulation. Version 2 of this software is just about to come, but it's called the Slate Digital Virtual Console Collection. And I've been using this in the studio now for a good 3 years. And as I said, I'm incapable of not using these plugins at various stages of production. So from there, no compression, nothing going on there. What I have got here is the mix bus version of the Slate Digital. And again, what this does, rather than the channel, because if you think about it, you have 2 different outlets or 2 different outputs within a mix console. You have the actual channels themselves, and then you have the master fader. Now, the master fader has all of those signals electronically summed to the mix bus, And there's something within that architecture, which I don't have time to go into today, because I could probably do a whole masterclass just on that, where how those signals come together in the mix bus will actually change the whole response of the console. So it's important to have this on the actual mix bus as well. And also as well, as a point, you can see my input is down by 3 dB, because this will mimic even things like the distortion if you do overdrive. So you have to be very careful with it. So I'm always applying it in a very kind of light way. Despite the size of that kick drum and the rest of what I'm going to show you, you'd be surprised at how minimal I am as a producer. I try and do things in as few moves as possible using as little processing as I can. The great advantage of that is that it leaves a lot of space. And even though these tracks on Drumcode, they sound so full, they're actually all about the space that you leave. A lot of clients come to me trying to emulate this style of techno, and the main thing that they kind of get misled and kind of deceive themselves into doing is that they really overfill, because they think it's big and it's got this energy, and therefore I must need 55 tracks with all these different hi-hats and all these different sounds and layers and and it just becomes just a mess. So what you have to do is pick the right sounds, get the raw materials exactly correct. That's where I spend 70 to 75% of my time in the studio. Getting those raw materials sound as good as possible, so I could actually make the whole track without even needing to process. So whatever processing in the form of this or anything else I'm going to show you is there to actually optimize and lift the level of the raw materials, rather than trying to compensate or trying to repair the fact that the samples or the sounds that you've built are in some way deficient. Okay? I'm all about getting the raw materials right, because everything else kind of falls into place after that. Again, I always ask this question: do you want to spend your time processing, taking something okay to make it acceptable? Or do you want to take something that is great and make it amazing? I'd rather be in the second camp. I'd rather be climbing the higher ladder.